It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. To search it out is the glory of kings. This is the Message to Kings podcast.
Episode 353, The Betrayal of Judas and Demon Possession. Matthew 26. Now it came to pass, when Jesus had finished all these things, that he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days is the Passover, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified." Then the chief priest, the scribes, the elders of the people assembled at the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and plotted to take Jesus by trickery and kill him. But they said, "Not during the feast, let there be an uproar among the people." Matthew 26:14. Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priest and said, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him to you?" And they counted out to him 30 pieces of silver. So from that time he sought opportunities to betray him. There's a limited account, really, of the betrayal of Judas, but there are slivers of the story in different accounts. That was Matthew. Luke 22. Now the feast of the unleavened bread drew near, which is called the Passover, and the chief priests and scribes sought how they might kill him. Then Satan entered Judas, surnamed Iscariot, who was numbered among the 12. So he went his way and conferred with the chief priests and captains how he might betray him to them. They were glad and agreed to give him the money. So he promised and sought opportunities to betray them in the absence of the multitude. And in the next episode, we're going to cover the Last Supper with Jesus. But in the middle of that is when Jesus tells his disciples that he's going to be betrayed. Peter has his own response, but he also makes a statement that the one who I give this bread to, and he gives it to Judas. There's a bit of confusion at that time. The disciples looked at each other. And in John 13:26, Jesus answered, "It is he to whom I shall give a piece of bread when I have dipped it." And having dipped the bread, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. Now after the piece of bread, Satan entered him. Now, I can't help but talk about that most of the rest of the episode, but let me finish the account here. Then Jesus said to him, "What you do quickly." But no one at the table knew for what reason he said this to him. For some thought, because Judas had the money box, that Jesus had said to him, "Buy those things we needed for the feast," or that he should give some to the poor. And having received the piece of bread, he immediately left them, and it was night. Judas would go on to the chief priest, betraying Jesus, telling him where he's going to be spending the night for 30 pieces of silver, the price of a slave. And if that doesn't ring with the story of Joseph, right, the 15 pieces of silver at that time, which he was sold by his brothers as a slave to the traders who ended up taking him down to Egypt. It's a terrible story. Judas is kind of spoken of as the one doomed to destruction. There's so many ways to look at it. Peter would later on, and this is for later episodes, but he would later abandon Jesus. All of them, except for John, would abandon Jesus. Peter would also deny him, but that's still different than betraying him. Judas actually betrayed him for money. He valued his idol, which was obviously money. John would speak of him as he valued himself and his money over other things. I've seen different justifications for what he did, not right, but some saying that he wanted to incite Jesus to do a rebellion, which is kind of a really poor conclusion, but I've seen that before. Judas he did not believe Jesus was what he said he was. Now, the others, Peter would say it, they all had their flaws. Um, but Judas um, did not have the character to sustain the challenges around him um, when the going got tough. I mean, it's gotten rough. There are people all around who are looking for ways to tear down Jesus, and it is Passover, and there's a frictious time, and there's multiple elements of society that are resisting against him, while thousands are clinging toward him. Uh, Judas joined the wrong side, um, but it also says that Satan entered him. That is a staggering statement. In multiple gospels, it actually says it. Um, Luke 22:3. Then Satan entered Judas. So he went his way and conferred with the chief priest. If you don't believe in demon possession, it's right here. It's right here. I mean, it says Satan entered Judas. How did he enter Judas? We have to believe that he wasn't a true believer. He had to have a hole in his heart, and he had to have an idol. And it must have been really, really bad. It's not some minor demon. The demon entered him. The same Satan that tempted Jesus in the desert wilderness entered one of his disciples to betray him. It's a sickening thought to think that the devil can enter people and possess them. But is it really a sickening thought? Look at history. Look at all the horrible things that have happened in history. Were they not possessed by the devil himself? He hasn't died. Spirits don't die. People die, but spirits don't die. They go from generation to generation. That movie, what was it, The Highlander? The guys who can't die unless they're beheaded. It's almost like the angels, not that they can be beheaded, but the spirits don't die. And they go from generation to generation. Um, this is spiritual war where angels and demons don't die. And God's eternal, but man lives a pitifully short existence on earth compared to those eternal beings that are waging a war over the planet. So I'm a history junkie. I absolutely love history. Um, I have fascination too with military history. Um, but let's go to the last great war, um, the largest war that we can go back to. That's World War II, and you look at the cause of it. I mean, the ideological hatred in the earth, um, most of it driven by one individual in Europe, Adolf Hitler. Was he possessed by the devil? Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Anyone who would systematically kill Jewish people, the devil hates Jewish people because that's God's chosen people. His desire for the earth was world domination, and all of his sick and twisted motives and occult practices, they smell of the devil and what he's done. You go back in history and you look at all these other cases of people who, shed innocent blood by the millions. They're possessed by the devil. I mean, that's what we're looking at here, and we have now biblical documentation that that's what he does. Can a believer be possessed by the devil? No, but can a believer be oppressed and um, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually harassed? Probably. I mean, look at King David. I wouldn't say he was possessed by the devil, but man, he messed up. He messed up so bad. He made some really stupid decisions, but he always repented and went back to God. And man is flawed. Man is um, weak, but man should be dependent upon God. New Testament believers have such an advantage over Old Testament believers because the Spirit of God lives inside of you. It's a different context. It would be actually, time travel would be terrible in the Old Testament because the Spirit of God is not inside believers. It's an old covenant concept. Hebrews, it says, the sacrifices could never take away sin. It was just a temporary action to alleviate consequences, and it had to be repeated over and over. It wasn't till the propitiation for our sins of Jesus on the cross that we could walk in a um, kind of like a high priestly authority of forgiveness um, that came with Jesus on the cross. But go back to the Adolf Hitler example. He was looking at him in history, just curiosity, like what makes someone so horrible. How could that be the case? Um, he was an utter nobody. In World War One, he ran between the trenches delivering messages. He didn't even go up a rank or two in the whole World War One. He had intense hatred. He was very odd. He had an abusive father, a failed musician, an artist. I think just artist. It was a nobody. Nobody. He was poisoned by chemical gas in World War One. He seemed to somehow bounce out of it a better person, um, at least in with some type of a vigor for life, not the right kind of life, but probably messed up was his brain, his thought processes. There's a couple interesting things. I heard it spoken of by Perry Stone. He said there's a story of him um, in Austria. There's a relic, and it's the spear of destiny, they call it, but it's a spear of it's kind of a spear, supposedly the spear that pierced Jesus' side, and those who wielded it would have supreme power. That was at least the story. But there is documentation that he stared at that and revered it to such a level he had a unique spiritual experience. Perhaps he gave his life to hatred at that moment of sorts. Um, there's something that is to be said about that he was empowered with kind of a dark spirit, maybe Satan himself. Let's go further back. In maybe late 1800s, early 1900s, a German archaeologist discovered in the church of Pergamum in the book of Revelation. It said, the letter to one of the churches in Pergamum, it said, I know your deeds and I know where the synagogue of Satan is, I think the throne of Satan is in your city. And the primary temple of Pergamum was actually would have been what he's implying in that letter. Well, that temple was rediscovered by a German archaeologist and disassembled piece by piece and rebuilt in Berlin before World War One. So now you have the rebuilt throne of Satan from the book of Revelation, rebuilt in Berlin. You can go see it today, the temple in Pergamum. It's there in Berlin today, but it's in World War One when it's rebuilt. World War One happens. Now we have Adolf Hitler and his experiences. We hear about him in the Spear of Destiny. And then eventually when he takes over the government in 1932 and in Germany in Berlin there, he is now ruling the government. at a place where the throne of Satan was. Now, if that's not bizarre enough, um, it why would we even be talking about him? But because we know that he started World War II and he committed the atrocities, and he has to be demon possessed. So now we're connecting all these dots, and we've got one more. This is so bizarre. But there's another one, statement by Perry Stone. He said there was a group of missionaries in Tibet, in 1932. They were take it for what it is. Take it for what it is. This is a crazy story. They are they're missionaries to all the priests there, um, and the priests are freaking out. They can't figure out what happened to all their gods. Um, and the missionary asked the priest what's going on, and and he said all of our gods are gone. Where'd he go? It's 1932, and he says they've left us. They've gone to Germany. That's a lot of dots to connect. Um, I just mention it because um, it's just fascinating when you take a history and you look at it from a spiritual perspective. Something so evil, so dark, um, and then you see what it says about Judas here, that Satan entered him, that the worst of society, the nastiest, um, worst things that ever happened in world history, Satan's behind it. How could he not be? And then you connect the dots, and you can see there's a thread of evidence that shows that the devil's behind it all. So when people say a lot of good things happen to bad things happen to good people, I'm like, it's good versus evil. I mean, there are absolutely terrible things that happen in this world, but God is fighting against evil, and He's using believers to do it. But we all have a role to play as believers. We have a role to play. We have a role to play that God has His way, not the devil, and that redemption, that message of redemption, and that cross, and the great harvest are yet to come. That God's story. Um, it, just look at the picture here. Here is Judas himself betraying Jesus for the price of a slave. Jesus surrendering himself to this demonic plan, yet it fulfills his greater plan. And it's the redemption of all mankind. Joseph was sold as a slave. He learned the characteristics of service, um, and kindness and forgiveness. He learned about redemption through God's plan. But God turned it all for good later and brought redemption to his family and saved the whole world from starvation. So God's plan always wins. It always overcomes. It always succeeds. So enough of the devil, right? So it's Judas later would betray Jesus, of course, for the silver. He would return the silver to the high priest. They wouldn't accept it. They would actually buy a field outside of town because they couldn't accept it. The priest even acknowledged that it was called blood money, and then they would buy a field outside of town. Funny enough, people who go to Jerusalem today can see that nothing has ever been built on that land because it's cursed. Um, Judas would hang himself, um, and he was the one doomed to destruction. And it's sad. And back in the earlier episodes, when I talked about the choosing of the 12, I had this thought that um, how sad was it for Jesus to know that he would eventually betray him, and yet he still chose him. That had to be one of the hardest things for Jesus, is to here's one of my guys, and that he would betray me. It's sad to think about that. the emotions that Jesus would have when he would cry tears of blood later on at the Garden of Gethsemane, right before Judas betrayed him, are just a flood of emotions. Sad to see sad to lose one of his guys, and we'll talk about that later. But sad that he's got all his disciples, they'll abandon him. But he would also say the joy that was set before him. And it was the doom also that all these high priests, all of those who would sneer him, all of those who, Jerusalem itself, because of Jesus' death, would be judged in 70 AD. So there's this sadness of knowing what will happen, because he's still fully human and fully God. Would have been quite overwhelming, but obviously the God part of him would allow him to, handle the flood of emotions of compassion and judgment, sights of future destruction, visions in his head. At the same time, knowing that there's another verse that said Jesus would push through for the joy that was set before him. And we'll end there and try not to go back on Judas again, because like I said before, enough of the devil, enough of the story of Judas. His place would be taken by another. Jesus silenced the demons, by the way, when they manifested before him. They don't have a right to speak. They don't have a right in the homes of those who walk with God. The demons don't have a right. God loves people. He hates sin, but he loves people. These demons don't have a right. It's sad to see Judas go, but it says that the joy Jesus pushed through in the coming days, he would push through for the joy that was set before him, for the redemption, the reconciliation, the fulfillment of the law, the establishment of the new covenant, and billions of souls that would be restored back to him. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Message to Kings. Feel free to check out the website, messagetokings.com, or if you want to chat, email us at messagetokings@gmail.com.